Kuntz, I'm so glad you volunteered to be a liturgist. I'm very much enjoying your reading today. Thank you. And for others who are thinking about it, just call the office. We'll get you in the schedule. Well, we have all gotten that phone call, haven't we? The call asking us to work on something, volunteer for something, run something, join something, or otherwise commit our abilities and our time, by the way, that we don't have to give, for something that we may or may not care about. And my guess is that call comes while we're already busy doing 33 other things that we really don't want to have to do, but they need to get done. At the same time, we're wishing we had some time for those one or two things we'd really like to be doing. Those calls are usually unwelcome interruptions in our lives. Well, the first 4 followers Jesus called to follow him had very busy, very full lives. Peter and his brother Andrew were fishing. That was their business. That was their livelihood. It was the business that demanded their full attention. Because Peter and Andrew had families to support, children to care for, and spouses with whom they shared life. Their mother was still alive and depended on them to take care of her as well. They were busy men with more than enough to do. Then Jesus found James and John and Zebedee, their father Zebedee, mending their fishing nets, which was a regular activity. If you had holes in the nets, you weren't going to catch fish. So mending a net was a part of business. Their lives were a lot like Peter and Andrew's. They had a business to run, families to care for, and parents who depended on them for care. They all had more than enough to do. Not only were Peter, Andrew, James, and John busy men, but they lived in a part of Israel that was predominantly Roman. The section of the Sea of Galilee that surrounded Capernaum housed Jews who were not considered to be very faithful by the rest of Israel. They lived in a predominantly Gentile area. They made a living working for and selling to Romans, and due to their work schedules, Jews around Capernaum were not considered to be very observant, which is another word for good church member. Now Matthew named 4 extraordinarily busy, probably not over-religious Jewish men who had commitments to their work and their families, and yet these were the first 4 guys that Jesus called to follow him. These 4 men had every reason to say no to Jesus, and even so, they said yes. So why did Jesus ask these particular 4 guys to follow him, and why did they say yes? That is a question that Christians have pondered now for 2,000 years, and the answer is, we have no idea. There's nothing in the writing of the gospel that lets us into the minds of Jesus or the followers. There's no psychological profile about what was going on. So let's ask the question, because we can't answer that one, let's ask the question from a different point of view. Why do we say yes? When we are busy beyond our capabilities, when we have too much to do and no time to do it, why do we say yes when those particular calls come? Well, sometimes we say yes because we just don't know how to say no. We accept the obligation, we get it over with, and we move on with our lives, breathing a sigh of relief all the way. And sometimes we say yes because we just feel really guilty if we don't. Sometimes we say yes because our loyalty to the person asking us overcomes our deep desire to scream, no! And sometimes we say yes because we think we ought to say yes, while with every fiber of our being, we are dreading that activity that's coming that causes us to say yes. Any of that sound familiar?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We all say yes to invitations when we know the answer should be no. And when that happens, we become involved in something that usually does not feed our souls at all. We end up being involved in something that drains the life out of us, that drains our energy. And when that happens, most of us look in every direction for a way to get out of that particular commitment. When it happens, the very thought of following through with our yes fills us with dread and just overwhelming fatigue. Been there, done that. When push came to shove, I politely bowed out of the conference worship team. I had said yes to our former district superintendent because when I talked to her and said, "How are you doing?" she said, "Well, I'm working 3 people's jobs as one person." I said, stupidly, I said, "What can I do to help?" She said, "The conference worship team," but I realized before it was too late that that's not the right activity for me at this time. And finally, the dread overcame my ability to follow through with a yes. And I thank God regularly for the courage to say no. But that was not the case for the people who followed Jesus. They said yes, and they followed through, and they found their lives were fulfilled. They found joy and hope, faith, meaningful work, and lives that actually made a difference in the world. So why did Jesus ask these particular men to follow him, and why did they say yes? Well, I've come to believe that it's because saying yes worked out, because Jesus was asking them to take the next step of faith. Jesus was asking them to take that next step that would help them grow closer to God. And when that invitation came, they were in a headspace where they could say yes. They said yes because it was time. Jesus asked, Jesus recognized the need in their souls and asked, and they said yes. Now, I believe a lot of us are ready to take the next step in our connection to Jesus. And there are signs that help us to know we're getting ready for that next step toward Jesus that are fairly universal. One of the signs is we are ready to take the next step when we've grown just a little bit bored with what we're doing in our lives, with what we're doing in our churches, with what we're doing in our families, what we're doing in our work or our volunteer lives. We're just a little bit bored. We know we're ready for the next step when we have a hunger within us that is not satisfied by any food known to humankind. We know we're ready for the next step when we start getting asked regularly to take on new responsibilities. We know we're ready for the next step when we already know where the sermon is going without having to listen to it. Or we find ourselves in the midst of the service pushed by the Holy Spirit into a completely different area of contemplation that actually does feed and nurture our souls. We know we're ready for the next step when we are eager to learn a new idea, to read a new topic, or to get into a new hobby when we already have way too much to do. Now, chances are those invitations to take the next step will not come at convenient times. In fact, they usually come at the most inconvenient time. They always do. But when the right invitation comes, we will discover we're ready to drop everything and follow. When that right next step appears, we won't hesitate to take it. Like Peter, Andrew, James, and John, we will drop everything and immediately follow Jesus. Now, I know there are people listening here this morning in this room and online. People who are ready to take that next step. I know it. And I know there are some of us who are overwhelmingly busy in our lives but utterly unsatisfied with most of what we're doing. And I know there are some of us who are just bored, even though we are up to our eyeballs in tasks that need to be done. And I know there are some people here this morning who want to hear, who are eager to hear Jesus inviting us to take the next step. Some of us are ready and eager to take that next step toward Jesus. And if that is you, all we have to say, okay, Jesus, I'm ready. And if that sounds way too spiritual, like how will I know that it's Jesus talking to me? Make an appointment to come talk with me. And I promise I will try not to pull you into something that needs to be done but you don't really want to do. Together we'll talk about what it is that you're feeling called to do, what the next step is, and we'll find a way to make that happen. Together we're going to move closer to that next step that might be just right for you. Now, chances are Jesus has already called to us once. And we're all pretty good about ignoring that call, aren't we? Wrong number. In fact, I love in the Bible to consider how many other people did Jesus call to follow him, but they said no, and finally got to Peter, Andrew, James, and John. We don't know. But Jesus called and to the right people, and they were ready, and they said yes. So Jesus has probably called each of us more than once. Jesus is asking us all to take that next step closer to God, closer to Jesus. And it's time to say yes. Because when we say yes, we find the meaning, joy, and hope that come from growing closer to Jesus. And we might as well say yes, because God is more persistent than we are stubborn. God will ask in increasingly loud and dramatic ways, at least that's my experience, until we can finally say, okay, you called. As much as I'd like to deny it, I'm ready. Jesus is calling to each of us. And I can see by your faces you're already coming up with the excuses. I'm already too busy, I'm too old, I don't have enough talents, I've got, phooey. Which is kind of what God is saying. Phooey on all that. It's time. Take the next step. Follow me. And a note to the kids. A note to the kids. A note to the kids. If you can tell me what the special music song was and what it has to do with what I was just talking about, it is worth a monetary reward. So if you can tell me what the song was that Tracy played, that happened to be by John Denver, by the way. Yeah, it was. The song that was played and why it's important to the sermon this morning and the text this morning. You can ask adults for help. And there are a few of us that recognize the song. It's worth a monetary reward. Jesus said, follow me. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. As we think about our time, as we think about our abilities, as we think about the money that we have been blessed with, the question is, what is the next step for us? And we can already say, oh, I'm already doing too much. I'm already way too much. As God says, phooey. As Jesus said, let's use all those things to follow him. Let's ponder that as the ushers wait upon us.